must have been an experience that led to you establishing the brand on clothing. So that is where you have to ask yourself, who am I? Is a very crucial question you need to ask. And who am I simply entails what are the journeys you have been through. Trying to convert your experiences into a fabulous story is what I'm talking about here.
What we think about become the reality that we have. Is it possible that when it comes to sort of, I don't want to say forcing the audience, but sort of inspiring the audience, let me put it this way, to think about certain things, in this case, to think about our business, our message, what we want them to think about?
When you use stories, we all selling the same thing. I offer marketing services, right? There's somebody else that offers marketing services out there. And there's a ton of other agencies around the world that offer marketing services. So more or less, for people, they have a paradox of choice.
The author of the storytelling series for small businesses and content creators. In Obehi podcast, we talk about the power of your story, your narrative, and why you should own your voice. Whether you are a small business owner, a content entrepreneur, or you simply want to build your influence, storytelling is probably going to be your best instrument to connect with your audience. So join the awakened few who are owning their voices. Now let's get started with today's episode. I want to welcome all of you again for joining us in this conversation. I am really so pumped to have interesting people here who want to share and who want to listen to the question we have today, which is why story works. Of course, story works because we can see a lot of big businesses from the usual suspect, the Apple, Disney, Microsoft, McDonald's, or even the one that is at the next corner. They all use storytelling, and the reason they use it is because it works. But sometimes we need to know why it works, because there are a lot of things that story encompasses, like touching emotion, engaging people, helping to build trust, helping to differentiate yourself. All these are different elements that make story really fascinating and make it a leveler for those who know how to use it. So yes, storytelling works. And with me today, I have interesting people who are really expert in the field, who will be responding to a few of my questions. You can call this one like a kind of an extension of Obehi podcast, because I sort of like to ask a lot of questions. In that I love to listen to people. I believe that is my best gift, to listen to people, and I love it. So I have two gentlemen and a lady who will be joining me here. Of course, you have heard of Tanya before in this room. Why don't we do it like this? Because Izu is newer in the room. We will start with you, Izu. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit? Then we'll move to Tanya. Izu, the mic is yours. All right. It appears that Izu is having a bit of a problem there. Tanya, can you take it off from there?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this room. A pleasure to see so many of you guys here, some of the regulars as well as some new faces. I'm really happy to see you guys here, and thank you for giving us your time. As for me, I'm Tanya. I'm a business growth architect, and I run a revenue growth advisory firm where we work with tech companies as well as consulting firms to grow their market share by leveraging digital platforms. And one of our assets that we love to use is storytelling. So I'm really excited about this room because this is something that I have seen work in numerous campaigns, some that I have run, some that colleagues have run, and I'm really excited to help you guys leverage that in your business.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. We can guarantee that because we have seen you, we have listened to you. At least for those of us that have been coming here more than once, they understand the value that they usually get out of this place. So thank you for joining us once again. I don't know if Izu, you can hear me. If
Can you
your
hear me,
mic,
my friend?
I can hear you now. All right, we are
All
listening to
right.
you. Please say something about yourself.
Thank you so much, Obehi. I got disconnected at some point, and I'd like to say very good evening to all the beautiful people who can hear my voice this moment. If this is your first time of meeting me, my name is Izo Samuel. In a nutshell, I believe that everything rises and falls on storytelling. A couple of decades ago, I have always believed in using storytelling to propel businesses to become better off in terms of visibility and making gains. So I am in the communications industry and also an executive journalist. So that is in a nutshell who I am. And over to you, Obehi. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for that, Izu. Well, I will also throw the first question to you because you are newer in the group here. Okay, Tanya have been here a number of times. Most of the guests here they already know her, I believe. So we are going to we want you to respond to the first question. Okay, I call it my curiosity as it were. So the question is, why is storytelling important for businesses? That is my first question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very brilliant question. Storytelling is important for businesses because every human being always buy from a place, a point of emotions. And emotions is totally connected to the concept of pain points. So the reason many of us are here right now is because we want to listen in, gain some value, and be able to use those value for our own good. For example, someone who wants to buy the SUV, someone who wants to buy a new house, someone who wants to study a new course in Chicago or in Africa or any part of the world, you are going to be going ahead to do all of those transactions because it addresses your pain points. And one of the easiest ways to build people, businesses, and then the pain point is by telling a story. When a story is told, people are connected. And when people are connected, people would always want to take an action. I remember that everything about this concept of storytelling can only be configured on emotions. So we tell stories to connect with people, and people would always buy from a point of emotions. Thank you, and over to you, Behi.
Thank you so much for that, Izu. That is very important. And there is no way we can rule out emotion when we are talking of storytelling. In fact, I do say often that one of the things that actually makes storytelling works because of the emotion. Because when we connect to at the point of emotion, we sort of get to, I don't know whether to call it alpha level, or where everything is sort of neutral. You can walk in me, I can walk in you. We sort of have a line that is almost blurred, as if it's almost not there, because that is a sort of it's an art. It's a very ancient part of us now when we are talking at the level of emotion. I remember one time I was sort of having a thought in my mind that was sharing it when I was doing my presentation here in Italy. I was saying, uh, who can tell me which language a child cries? Uh, that might sound very simple, but it's also very profound. It's the same way if you flip it around to ask, which language do you cry when you cry? You see, these things are not really thing that you need to go to school to study, or you need somebody to break your head and put it to eat. You don't need to understand Arabic to know that an Arabic woman, a man, or a child is crying. You just need to see what is happening. You know that that individual is crying. You also do not need a lot to understand what are the conditions that leads to crying, because you would have cried in your life. You know what it means to cry. So when we talk about emotion, we are talking about a point. Okay, another thing I will add to that would be maybe like laughing. Laughing, they say often, is very contagious. Is that sometimes you might not know why somebody is laughing, but you just do the experiment yourself. Sit close to somebody, and the person is laughing very hard. At a point, you will just fall into it and begin to laugh too, because it's very contagious. Those are very high emotional interaction element, which when you are in the play, other people, even though you don't invite them, they can sort of join you to play. So I think emotion in this sense can be really very powerful for small business owner who want to connect with other people. Because when you connect at the level of emotion, then every other thing become easier for you. When you miss it at that point, you are going to do a very hard say. You're going to do your say. You're going to apply a lot of strategies to make it work when you eliminate emotion. But when you add emotion to it, then it becomes a little bit easier. All right. Now, Tanya, I have a curiosity. I have a question for you. Because we talk about the use of emotion in storytelling. And now, let's say all businesses are the same. Okay. All businesses are sort of offering the same thing in a particular situation. Now, for us to be able to differentiate ourselves so that we are not just all doing the Me Too type of content all the time or repeating what other people are saying all the time. Storytelling is going to be important in this area. So I'm trying to see from your experience, how would somebody use storytelling to differentiate themselves? Or in this sense, I'm saying, how would a small business owner or businesses use storytelling to differentiate themselves?
All right, this is actually a great question. So thank you for asking that. And it's something that I actually just recorded an episode on my own podcast, Biz Talk with Tanya, and it's getting released tomorrow. And this is one of the things that I was speaking to. And it's because when you use stories, we all selling the same thing. I offer marketing services, right? There's somebody else that offers marketing services out there. And there's a ton of other agencies around the world that offer marketing services. So more or less for people, they have a paradox of choice. So I want you to imagine when you go to the supermarket and you have to get some of your favorite things. When you walk into the store and you realize that you see a number of brands on the shelves, but most of the time you will pick particular brands over and over again. And most of the time it's because you have some kind of emotional relationship with that. For example, if you're picking up Kellogg's as part of your cereals, the primary reason is that since we were kids, we have been exposed to marketing message around Kellogg's for breakfast. In the same way, the brand of milk that you choose, it's the same thing. And that's the reason why advertising exists, actually great advertising, which is not direct response, is the aim is to influence you and to tell you a story and a narrative every day that it becomes second nature. And the other day, I gave the example of cereals. We all like, oh, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And if you go and do your research, you'll realize that in the 60s or 70s, that was the primary message that people, cereal companies went to market with, and that stuck with society. So the reason why you use stories, especially in the marketplace where things are the same, and now with the internet, everything is connected, and people are seeing messages all the time, marketing messages all the time, ads all the time. If you do not have any form of brand affinity with the market, they ignore you. This is why most of the time you might pick Kellogg's and it's more expensive than your no-name brand cereal that you see that is a lot cheaper. And that's not because you want the most expensive thing, it's because of that narrative in your brain. So this is why you use stories, you create narratives. If as a brand you do not use stories to create narratives around your brand, you are literally screaming in the middle of a concert. Nobody can really hear you. Nobody can hear your voice. Try screaming in a concert where there's such loud music and everybody's shouting near you. Nobody can recognize your voice. However, that's the same thing when you are marketing and just trying to show your features, your benefits. That's usually the same thing. The market just hears noise. However, when you start creating narrative and infusing stories into your marketing, you become memorable because it's not necessarily that they remember everything about your brand, but there's certain affinity that they remember, certain things you might have made them feel, certain conversation, dialogue that they've had with themselves that your marketing has forced them to have. And that's usually if you're selling premium services, high ticket products and services, those kind of conversations that you force them to have that dialogue with themselves. And that allows your brand to stand out and they have that affinity. Oh, okay. Obey's company is doing that. Yeah. I remember they doing that. Now that I think about it, now I actually have to handle this issue. Maybe your product or your service. Let's say you sell coaching, because we on one side of the company we work with coaching companies, and for a lot of people, coaching is not. They don't really think that coaching is a must-have. They feel that it's a nice-to-have. Now, when you incorporate storytelling and you create narratives, you move from having a nice-to-have, because now you're like, oh, actually, I need leadership coaching. I've really not been doing my job properly. I've not been managing properly. Now that I think about it, my team is not effective. I'm not really leading this company the way it should be. We are losing people that are working for us all the time. And this is why this is happening. And actually, this is not good, because now they think about it, oh my gosh, Izu said that in the story that he shared in his marketing. And this is what can give you a competitive advantage, especially if you are competing with the Goliaths of your industry. So when you incorporate stories, then you actually level the ground with the Goliaths, because now they have the budget. You can't fight them with budget, but now because you have the better narrative, you can get some of the market share.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. Thank you so much. That is really very important. The line that you draw there, and I believe that our audience are getting the full detail of that. I think it sort of played to the advantage of the beginners in the room, because I have a question to ask Izu just now about that. Because now, if you have a lot of money, of course, you can hire any person to craft the narration that you want. And of course, you will win, because it means that you are not going to be the one that is doing it. You just have the money to throw out there. You can try out different things. You can spend millions and even billions of dollars on creating your narrative. If it doesn't work, you put money on it again. At a point, it will work. But you don't have all that money. We know that if you're a small business owner, you are maybe having a coaching business, or maybe you are doing a small service business out there. You don't have all that resources to be able to spend. But you have your mouth, you have your imagination to be able to tell your story. And in this case, you don't need to hire a Hollywood expert to be able to tell your story. You can start where you are. That is actually the best way to tell story. In that, start where you are. What happens to you yesterday? You certainly can do that. Do you have a mother? Do you have a child? Did your child get you angry? Because by the time you start relating this situation that are very, Italian will call it banale, which is very ordinary, this ordinariness of things, the ordinary people will understand. You are not to believe that you want to target ordinary people. Because if you are looking for the superstar, of course, you are going to talk like the superstar anyway. But I want to believe that if you are running a coaching business, and maybe the people you are targeting are people like you, then you must speak like you are. You don't have a Ferrari. You don't need to speak like the one who is riding a Ferrari, because that is not, if you speak like the one inside a Ferrari, and the people you are targeting are the one that are riding Fiat Punto, then you are going to lose, because you are not at the same level. So that is very important there, that you as a small business owner, you do have an advantage to be able to use storytelling to get the same result that other people will use money to get. That is very important. All right, Izu, I come to you. You are an expert in communication. In fact, you are a communication a consultant. A couple of days ago, we had a very interesting conversation, a podcast, of course, which is coming out later. Now, the question I have for you is that the people that are in the audience, some of them are beginners. They are not really professional in storytelling or how to use story in their business. They are here to learn. So where should they start from? Help me.
All right, thank you so much for that question. And hello to everyone who is possibly joining right now. The first thing I'm going to say is this: the concept of storytelling is simply, in clear terms, is all about who you have been and what you have been. Years ago, I had this conversation with this person who said she had this powerful story, but she doesn't know how to communicate the stories. So for her, she believes that she cannot sound like Les Brown. She cannot sound like Oprah Winfrey. She cannot sound like Martin Luther King. She cannot sound like Tony Elumelu. She cannot sound like those people. And I say to her, look, And I'm going to share the same secret with all of you. The same secret is what has been working for me and all the businesses I have consulted for. The first thing you need to consider here is the concept I called story why. Story why. The concept of story why. The first thing it is, who am I? Now, this is a crucial question that you have to answer if you are ever going to understand why you should tell your story. So let's not confuse the concept of telling a brand story with telling your own story. Your story is all about what the brand is about. So if your brand is on clothing, you can't just establish a brand on clothing without having to have an experience. There must have been an experience that led to you establishing the brand on clothing. So that is where you have to ask yourself, who am I? Is a very crucial question you need to ask. And who am I simply entails what are the journeys you have been through. Trying to convert your experiences into a fabulous story is what I'm talking about here. Now, the second thing you're going to ask yourself is, what do I do? Now, this question is very crucial because it's going to help you to find clarity about who you are. Because when you know who, then you need to bring it down to what. For example, years ago, Oprah Winfrey was raped, and she began her journey as a communicator, as a motivational speaker. Her voice wasn't heard. But the moment she decided to start talking about her experience of being raped, people started listening to her. The same with myself. Years ago, I had a lot to say, but nobody listened to me until the moment I decided to bring it down to what. Is the what exactly are those challenges? Is the what are those things you want to communicate? What are those things you want people to hear? What are those things you want people to perceive? Is a game of perception about the what. Now, the other one is why. There has to be reasons. There has to be reasons. Why did I have to start tell my story? Why should I tell my story? Why should your brand be communicated using a story? Why should people connect with you from a place of story? So there has to be reasons. For me, the reasons were enormous. Part of the reasons was the fact that if I did not communicate my story across the people, there will be lots of people who doesn't know that they have so much and they can be able to express themselves, because I found myself in an environment that never allowed me to express myself. I had so much to say, but then any moment I opened my mouth to speak, it was as if I was sounding like a broken record. So along the line, people started getting disconnected from me. I started losing people. People never believed in me because you don't tell people how to receive you or how to perceive you. You tell people how to you don't have the right to command people as to how they will perceive or receive you. It is your assignment to communicate in a certain way that people would want to listen to you. And this is where the why is. Why? What are the whys? What are those stories you have been through? What are those experiences? Now bring it down to why. And then the other one is what I have called the how do I do it? How do I do it? Now, when I started, the first thing I did was to write my story in a piece of paper. From a piece of paper, I had a discussion with one of my elder brothers who worked at the radio station. So one of the times they invited me to the radio station. So along the line, I shared my story. From there, lots of schools started inviting me, from schools, organizations, from organizations, companies, institutions, and the rest of it. So the how here, you can decide to use the LinkedIn as a platform to tell your stories. You can decide to use different platforms to establish your stories. So using different platforms is going to be able to help you to be able to go about it in some ways, because you can be telling a story where there is no audience listening in. And the final thing here is, who do I do it for? Who would my story resonate? There has to be with some sense of specificity. What story do you have, and whom does this story resonate with? My story resonated with people who had so much but they couldn't express themselves, like their thought leaders, communicators, aspiring TEDx speakers, business people who had so much of great ideas they wanted to communicate, but they didn't know how to communicate the branding and the stories behind their brands. So my experience cut across different institutions and sectors. So I decided to focus on all of those sectors with the intent to speak out my story, relate my stories to these people. And I realized this: when you communicate your story to the wrong people, you would end up wasting your time and your resources. For every story, there is an audience it is meant for. For every brand, there is an audience it is meant for. So you need to ask yourself that question. You see, the biggest problem we have, and I have experienced this too, is that many people don't think. Many people would rather die than think. If you can sit down to ask yourself, who am I? What do I do? Why do I do it? How do I do it? And who do I do it for? If you can answer these questions carefully, like carefully pen down your responses carefully with some sense of carefulness, you would realize that you would come up with a very solid story about yourself and about your brand. My name is Izu Samuel. Over to you, Obehi.
Thank you so much for that, Izu. That is very powerful. That is really very powerful and highly valuable. And one thing I really want to take away from there before I move on is that it is very important that we understand that we are serving a people. We are not serving everybody. We are serving a people, a group of people. This can be, you can't even say, even though here, for example, we are targeting the African diaspora community and also people from Africa, we are not just targeting every African person. It is not going to work. In the diaspora alone, we are hundreds of millions of people. I cannot simply say that what we are doing is going to resonate with all of them. It is not true. For us to be able, in my place in Esan, where I'm coming from, in the south of Nigeria, there is an adage that, oh, where I fail, we jump back, not that tiehu. Let me explain. That for the piece, that is the urine of a man to foam, you need to urinate in one place, in one point. You cannot urinate here, then drag and urinate here, then drag and urinate there. It will not foam. The essence, what it basically means is that you need to concentrate. Concentrate on what you are doing. Be focused on something. So in this sense, be focused on a specific audience. Not everybody. Everybody cannot be our audience. It is when we understand that we come to understand also what Izu is saying before, that because it's not all the channel you are going to have all your audience. Some people prefer certain channel, for example, on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube or Twitter. All of them are not the same. There are different psychology for the functioning of these different platforms. When we understand who our audience is, how they consume information, then where they found themselves, then we need to go there to talk to them in the language that they understand. Then the work will become much easier for us. All right, I'm coming to Tanya just now, but before then, we have the beautiful Melissa in our midst. Melissa, please go ahead and tell us something before we move to Tanya. Tanya have something to respond for me.
Wonderful. I just wanted to say hello, greetings, Melissa Perkins. I'm the founder and owner of You Think Indigo, a global think tank, and it's an honor to be in this space and listen and learn from Izu and Tanya and yourself. So thank you so much for the honor of being here.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We appreciate that. We love that when people come in to say something about themselves and also what they do. That is absolutely very important. All right, Tanya, I come to you. I'm begging you to help me respond to this question. It had to do with the behavior, because even in your explanation before, we understand that people or businesses use storytelling because they want to condition the behavior of the audience. Of course, that is why stories are used, no? If you watch television, okay, maybe you don't know, but the people who created the television that you are watching, that is what they have in mind. They don't just throw in any type of program there. They throw in certain type of program. And they do that based on the idea of what they want from you. they basically are conditioning people anyway. So what I'm trying to understand is how would small businesses use storytelling to sort of influence the behavior of their audience, or in this case, if you like, of their client also?
Yeah, so my company, we primarily leverage an approach to marketing. For those that are in the marketing field, would know it as a psychology-based marketing. So it's a form of persuasive marketing. And one of the reasons why we're very careful even on the type of clients that we onboard is because we don't want to equip the wrong people with these tools, because it can, if in the hands of the wrong person, it can be manipulative. So just putting it out there. So one of the things with stories, and this is why we are really in love with storytelling, and I even shared it on my private newsletter that we have, goes out every Saturday. If you want to join, feel free to. But there's something when we are humans. I'll give you an example. I believe a lot of us here have kids. When you have a small kid and you light a candle or a fire around them, they are curious about it and they want to touch it. And most of the time, when you ask them not to touch it, kids being kids, they want to touch it, because what is happening is that your brain is trying to collect data. And once they touch it, they realize that it is painful. The next time you light a fire and you put them close to it, you'll find the child shrieks away. And that whole thing is called schemas. With our brain, and we have what is called schemas. So it's usually a set of data that we would have and we will store and in our brain, and that starts helping us shape our perception of things around our world. So your environment, how you grew up, the household you grew up in, everything. As a child, you absorb everything, and that creates your schemas. And I'm coming back to stories. So how do we store data as human? We create stories, because there's a lot of data coming at us every day, right? So we create those schemas, then it's formed into a form of stories, and then it is stored in our subconscious. As human, we have to daily make decisions, but most of the time you realize there are so many decisions that you make and you don't think about it twice. Like going to the tap to open the tap to grab some water, you do it easily. You don't have to think about it. That's because your brain has formed a schema around it. How you light the stove, you have a schema around it. How you go to the store, you have a schema around it. So what happens when you tell stories, especially when you are trying to change people's behavior? Let's say you are launching a fintech. And it's an online bank. You are trying to change how people bank. You are trying to change how people make financial decisions. So most of the time, people are already making financial decisions. They're already banking. If you say you may be banking with First National Bank, you are banking with Standard Bank or whatever other bank. Now, as humans, something about us is that we hate making decisions. Making new decisions is risky. It's too much stress. So our brain doesn't like that, because it wants to be able to operate on a cruise mode. So because most of the time we are on cruise, on autopilot. We're operating on autopilot. So when you start telling stories, what happens is your brain processes it as a form of new schema. So it's processing new information, and you are inserting schemas into the audience brain. And this is in a way that the brain doesn't reject. Because if you're trying to insert information into the target market audience with just plain data, the brain is like, I got too much to do. There's money issues. Girl, I'm broke. I got this going on. Now my boyfriend left me. Now my husband did that. Oh, I can't believe he left the toilet seat up. So everything is in our brain, right? But now you are trying to give me new data, and I'm too busy with my own data right now to process that. So when you start telling stories, you are inserting new schemas into the brain. So now that data gets absorbed, the brain stores that into the subconscious. So eventually what happens, the brain starts processing it in the same way as all the schemas that it had accumulated over the years. So that's when you see that maybe somebody wasn't thinking about doing something. Now they're like, I actually need to do this because this now makes sense. Does that make sense? And please don't go be using that I plead the fifth. If you're going to use it in the wrong way, I don't know you. I don't know you like that.
All right, Tanya. I will ask another thing before I move to Izu, in relation to what you already said. No, now as I'm processing the information that you delivered there, I have a thought in my mind. I was seeing a kind of social experiment one time, and I think, of course, many of you would have already seen it relate to psychology. Uh, in that something was happening in a room, a very big baboon passed. Then they asked the people that were there, "What did you see?" None of them could actually identify that there was a baboon that passed. So as you were talking, I'm trying to think: is it possible, or is it like when we tell story or when we create information that are well curated, we're actually interrupting and then directing the attention of the audience or the listener of what we want them to concentrate on that particular point in time? Because if we come to analyze the reality around us now, we see that there are a lot of billions of information around us, but we never pay attention to them. Because, like you said, there are a lot of data. Our brain is just not able to handle all this data. Therefore, the brain is going to focus on those important information that it needs to make the body function. How you understand this is maybe you are sitting in a room, you don't even realize that in the room that you are sitting, or maybe you are even looking around you never see that there is a green color in your room. If somebody were to ask you to swear, you will swear. But until that time, somebody say, "Hey, look at the green color." You look around, there is a green color here. But that green color have always been there. It had never gone away. It's just because you didn't pay attention. That is something very ordinary, very simple. No, it can go into very many areas, like what we think about. What we think about become real, become the reality that we have. Is it possible that when it comes to sort of uh, I don't want to say forcing the audience, but sort of inspiring the audience, let me put it this way, to think about certain things. In this case, to think about our business, our message, what we want them to think about. Is it possible that storytelling can be really this powerful that we can use it to condition the people into what we want them to believe about our business?
Okay, yes, it's exactly that. This is why, first of all, I always say, any time somebody uses any form of persuasive marketing as well as psychology-based marketing, it needs to be used in an ethical manner because it is in a way bringing them to something to their attention they might not have been prepared for. So it's always should be used ethically. And this is why also when like people are like getting into a coaching programs, we tend to really interview people to ensure that we don't equip the wrong people with these skills because then they will go and manipulate the market. So it definitely can do it in that manner where you are moving, and it's called nudging. It's called behavioral nudging. So storytelling is a form of behavioral nudging where you are pushing an audience or somebody to an outcome that you want them to go towards.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I really do. For the rest, I would like you to figure out. No, I mean for the audience, you can figure out the rest because I think what Tanya left there, of course, what I've also added is that there is a lot of power buried in the act of storytelling. Now we have a friend in the room, Paul. Paul, please tell us something before I move to the next question with Izu. Please go on, say something about what we are having today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say, Obehi, thank you so much for allowing me to speak and holding the room. And I just want to say hello to some friends in the audience, Kimberly and Jay. Good to see you again. this topic of storytelling is so powerful, and the the part that I didn't really understand up until I started interviewing people on my live show Impossible Equals Impossible is that where storytelling really becomes so powerful is when you're able to see yourself in somebody else's story because it builds instant connection. It's almost like you feel like you know the person, you can relate to them. And personally, I respectfully disagree with the fact that your personal story and business are different. And I'll kind of use myself as an example. So when I came to LinkedIn about a year ago, I didn't really have a professional like built-in network. I wasn't like a speaker. I didn't have like publication. I didn't have a lot of the things that I do now. And I literally built my entire following and based on my personal story. And one of the things that I found when I was working with people in the professional world is that the reason why they chose to work with me and what I did in my business was because my personal story was so powerfully related to why I do what I did, the experiences that I had. And I feel like so many times people tell themselves, right? Like so many people think, oh, my story's not unique. Oh, um, I don't really have anything to say. Like it's just an ordinary story. And I feel like the biggest lie that people are sold is that I'm not there enough to help somebody else because the truth is that it doesn't matter like how old you are, what your gender is, what your race is. There's always going to be somebody who's ahead of and behind of you in life. So it's important to reach up to grow while also reaching back to teach. And a lot of times it's really just maybe shifting the audience or the target of who you're trying to target. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So thank you for allowing me to speak. And I love this topic. I think we all can agree that LinkedIn has shifted to a lot of genuine storytelling. And I believe that's why, because it builds instant connection with people and a lot of relatability. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate that. I really do. Storytelling is powerful. If you are in a position where you listen to people, because one thing is to talk, another thing is to listen. Listening for me is very very powerful. By listening to people in my podcast, the Obehi podcast, for example, I've learned so much. I've learned so much, not just about the people that are talking to me, but even about myself. So, yes, when we listen to people talking, sharing their experiences, they could also be reading a book, for example, because when you are reading a book, you are reading the heart that is poured into paper by somebody. So that is story, and that is really powerful. All right, Izu, before I move to Jay, I'm coming, don't worry. Izu, I want you to help me with this. You see, now because we explained all these different things, and thanks also to Tanya and you, of these different dynamics about storytelling, somebody might be wondering, are there some examples out there of businesses that are using storytelling that you could point out that we can learn from? Help me with that. What would you say of some examples of successful businesses that are using storytelling effectively? Please share with us.
All right, thank you so much for that question. So I'm gonna respond to that question by just saying this. Um, let's just keep this storytelling thing very simple because the reason most people run away from storytelling is because when they hear from most people, they just think this is impossible. Let's keep it very simple. So let's go back to most of our local businesses around us before we go to the well-known businesses. So there are lots of local businesses in our environment, no matter where you're joining in from right now. The reason they are turning on thousands of dollars is because they are projecting their stories very effectively. And the global businesses that we already know, the reason we consider them to be leading businesses is because they are leading businesses who understands the importance of leading their businesses from a place of strategic storytelling. A very healthy example. of these businesses I'm talking about, I can make reference to Elon Musk. Elon Musk has truly influenced my ideology on storytelling to the point that I I understood it from a very strategic point of view. Now, Elon Musk, if you understudy this guy, and he runs a business that he doesn't run a promotion for. He has never done any promotion for any of the product or services that he's offering. He's never done any of those, but he's always showing up on different platforms, telling his stories strategically. He tells his stories controversially. He tells his stories whenever at the gym, he's telling his story. At the businesses, he's telling his story. On podiums, he's telling his story. And the very second example I will make reference to is Mark Zuckerberg. Now, the owner of Facebook and all of those other social media handles connected to them. The reason I'm mentioning all of these tech guys is because these guys have come to the point where they understand that the easiest way to get to people is through stories. So Facebook is always telling their stories. If you interview Mark Zuckerberg, the first thing he's going to tell you is about his experience at the college. That will be the prime information he wants to bring on. In fact, 83.13% of his interviews have all been around the concept of how Facebook was initiated. The same thing with Elon Musk. So we bringing it down to Africa. We have Tony Elumelu. Now, Tony for me is like Grant Cardone in the States. There is no much difference. And then you talk about Les Brown, who is selling information and the rest of it. Now, Tony Lumelu versus Grant Cardone. The one of the factors that has distinguished these guys is the fact that these guys knows that it is not enough to talk about what you know when you have not communicated what you know in the form of a story. Now, when I understudied these guys I've mentioned, Grant Cardone, Tony Lumelu, Elon Musk, founder of Facebook, and many other businesses across the globe, I realized that these guys understood that the highest and the most effective form of communication is via storytelling. And these principles are universal. Well, no matter where you're joining it from, you can reach out with these principles and it works for you. So even if your business is just about $2,000, if you begin to tell stories consistently across all social media handles using different mediums, people would connect with you. I believe that there is nothing in the history of storytelling that is as powerful as when you tell the reasons why something happened to you. So the final thing I'm going to say here is this, guys. Every of these things I'm saying is boiled down to the fact that your story is a product of an experience you had. Your story is a product of an experience you had. And what these guys are doing is that they know how to turn their experiences into fabulous stories. So if you can hear me right now, if you want to be heard, if you want to be received, if you want to be perceived as a person of value, look backwards and try to consider what experiences you have had in time past and turn those experiences into a fabulous story. And nobody on earth, I repeat, nobody on earth would ever take your voice for granted. Storytelling, one of the most effective forms of communication. Izu Samuel, over to you, Behi.
Thank you so much, Izu. Thank you so much for that. You really touched something that is so fantastic there. Touching of the story of Elon Musk. This is a big tech giant, actually. Uh, okay, I know some of them might be pay for ad, but in the particular case of Elon Musk that you mentioned, that is really very important because he become the richest man in the world, and he does it through storytelling by telling his story. You see, there is nothing as important as owning your voice. It's so good, it's so great, it's so valuable. You are registering your presence in the universe. Because another person can actually tell your story for you too. But how can somebody do that for you to the level that you will want it to be done? Money cannot buy that. Your story is absolutely powerful, but you must own it, or you are going to be at the mercy of some other persons to represent you in the story. I say this often where we will say, but they didn't add us in the story. But Who said they are going to add on to the story? You are the one that will own your story. Take the stage, shout your name. You see, Iso, you were saying something very important. That this is something that I use in all my books, which is repetition. When I start writing my book, I will establish some concept. Throughout all the chapters of the book, I will continue to repeat them. The reason I do this consciously is that maybe you miss it in the first chapter, but in the second chapter, you see the concept coming back again. So another person might say, well, you are making repetition. Yeah, I'm doing it consciously. They say that repetition is actually the secret. That is why in the television, there are certain things that are repeated all the time because they don't want you to miss it. Anyway, I want to leave
Can I
that
join
there.
in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, now when you said repetition, it took me back to one of the lessons I learned from Les Brown. I have received trainings from the Les Brown and the best of the people across the globe. He said something I will never forget. He said, repetition begets reception. Repetition begets reception. And your story is only going to be powerful when you repeat your story over time. Your story can only be received when you keep telling that story. The story is worth being a story when the story can sustain the travails of consistency. Back to you, Obehi.
Thank you so much for that. I so much love that. Anyway, for those of us that are in the audience, you understand where we are coming from. That this is a project that comes from a research into the presence of Africans in northern Italy, trying to understand their experiences, their story. From there, I understand the importance of actually zooming the lens on the act of storytelling. And of course, even now that we are paying attention to small businesses, we have created an e-learning platform so that for those of you who want to level up, who want to take advantage of it, you can join in. We give you all the details that you need to be able to take your storytelling to the next level. It's called Storytelling Mastery. And of course, you can access it at aclasses.org. That is our training platform. And of course, if you want to get the book, any of the book, there are 5 in number to read. They are also available on Amazon, so you can check it out. All right, Tanya, I have something for you. Now, what would you say about maybe some of the elements that make a story really compelling? Talking of business story, of course, and because now Iso have made mention of some people, some individual like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and the rest who are very good in storytelling. Ordinary person want to know what are some of these elements that make it work, that make it compelling. What do you have to say about that?
All right, I'm gonna answer that. If you, for to the people in the audience, if you have a question around storytelling, this is the best time for you to raise your hand, come up, ask your question, so that we can possibly help you. As in, what are the elements of storytelling? First of all, is knowing your audience. Hey, it's important to know your audience. And there's something that I recently was telling a client. There is a difference, for example, in audiences. They are sophisticated buyers and unsophisticated buyers. And it's not nothing to do with money. It's actually more to do with exposure to your kind of messaging. So knowing who you are addressing, then knowing what is the purpose of the story that you are trying to tell. So if you are trying to say to get the prospect, the target audience to identify themselves in your business or something of the sort, then you use the oldest story framework, which is the hero story framework, which is usually you would do it in a way where you're not the hero, but the customer is the hero. If you are trying to get them to understand your product, then you will tell a product story. Where does your product come from? Why actually the narrative around that? Then why your business? Then you tell a narrative story. And if you are trying to get them to identify with you, then you will tell an origin story, for example. So it's often comes down to the context of the story and what is the end in mind. So if you are trying to get them to buy a lot more and they probably are at already the consideration stage in the buying cycle, or they are about to make a decision, they are in market, then an origin story will not work because they are not at the space where they're like trying to get to know you, because probably they've already known you, they know about your brand. So at that point, they are trying to understand how your product, your services solve the issues. So at that point, you will probably go around giving the product story or the customer hero's journey story. So it's always very important to understand that. So understand your ideal client to the point where you understand their sophistication in terms as buyers, because an unsophisticated buyer might not have encountered a message like yours before, so it's easier for them to be persuaded. However, a sophisticated buyer might have encountered that, might have tried different solutions, and at that point they're a little bit jaded. So how you structure your story to speak to a sophisticated buyer in comparison to an unsophisticated buyer would be completely different.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. And I really appreciate that. And thank also to Jay. Jay, thank you for your patience. Please share something with us. We appreciate your presence here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ad. And thank you for hosting the room. Very good conversations that I'm listening to today. I wanted to talk to everybody in the room from the perspective of the storyteller. My initial introduction to the world of work was as a journalist. And so storytelling is absolutely important, obviously, in that industry. But the difference in that industry as compared to storytelling in business is that you're devoid of emotion when telling these stories. You are supposed to remove yourself from telling that story from your personal perspective to allow the audience to figure out what is the important message in the story that you're trying to convey. So going back to what Tanya was saying, you definitely have to consider your audience. Now, my position and my thinking had to change when I became a poet and when I tried to I'm a cultural practitioner, so I'm a Pacific Islander. I come from an island where heritage is passed down verbally from generation to generation. We didn't have a written language. So to convey the importance of handing down your legacy and your culture, you have to do it in such a way where you have to embed yourself in the story, embed yourself in the poetry to convey a very strong message of survival, right? So considering the audience. Now, moving to me being a consultant in the call center space, taking that story again, conveying it to business people, going back to what Paul was saying, now I do have to embed myself in this story when I'm talking about empathy and resilience. Now, my story is this. I survived a tornado. This tornado went on to kill 18 people nearby. And the mere fact that I'm having a conversation with everybody in the room is a miracle and a testament to what we can do as people, as human beings, right? And so when I talk to businesses about, well, how does that personal experience help in storytelling, help in these businesses scale their business? With empathy, I don't know in customer service what the customer is experiencing, what their pain points are. So sometimes telling a story that comes from a personal experience allows us to have that interaction and that rapport. And so you're able to draw from that and they're able to understand your position. So it's important to share that story of struggle. And so they can understand that you are empathetic to whatever pain point they have. So empathy is definitely important in business. Resilience, the fact that I came out of this traumatic experience a survivor and not a victim, talking about that from a personal perspective of being a tornado survivor helps them understand my position, helps them understand that I am talking from a sense of authority because I know from a personal experience what that feels like and what that's all about, and then transferring that into business.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you. I really appreciate your sharing. I appreciate that. I really do. All right. Time is not always our friend. We are moving towards the end of it. So I'm going to ask the last question to Izu and also the last one to Tanya. All right. Izu, what I would like you to help us understand is if there are some risks associated with storytelling, or if there are things that some small businesses need to avoid in the use of story for their businesses. Please go ahead and help us with that. Is the last one.
The first thing businesses must understand here, and when I say businesses, I'm talking about value proposition. If you have a problem you're solving, you are in business. So if you got a problem you're solving right now, you are in business and you're a business person. The first you must put out in terms of how careful you have been in coming from a curve and not from an angle is that you must be very careful with telling your story and backing up your story with some legal means. Plagiarism is a big problem, not just in some parts of the world, but across the world. It's a global issue. So you need to be able to ensure that your stories are patterned, especially if you're very serious about your business. If you see your business growing up to a certain level, you need to be able to ensure that there is legal backup to that story. This is why there are certain stories you can copy on Google. There are certain stories you can copy on YouTube. There are certain stories you can copy on www platforms. You can only take legal permission to use those stories. And the second thing I'm going to say is this. Your story is at risk if the unique selling proposition of your story is not properly defined from the beginning. The unique selling proposition of your story has to do with everything about your business, your color. Your story must communicate your color, your story must communicate your philosophy, your story must communicate your principles, it must communicate every single thing you can think of in terms of what you represent, what your business represents. And the last thing I'm going to say is this. Your story is at risk if the people who are telling your story don't understand the common factor of emotional intelligence. Now, there are certain factors that can never work with your story until the point that the people who are telling your stories come to the angle that can cut across the importance of having to communicate from an angle of emotional intelligence. So, storytelling goes beyond a narrative, a stage, a historical storyline of two animals that never stop fighting each other, and all of those things. The art is about us, the art is about the people, the art is an experience. So the people who communicate the story must be able to communicate the experience as well. So this is why, if you're a business owner here, you need to also invest in having your staff, your team, understand what is called the psychology of the business of your story. So when your team understands the psychology of the business of your story, it becomes very relatable for them to tell your story coming from a place of emotional intelligence. This is a lot, but because of time, I will land my plane here and yield the mic to you, Obehi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Izu. Of course, we do have all the time. Of course, we are going to be here again next time. So with me, people should come here for the continuation of the conversation. All right. Now we talk of how to bring in the psychology of the business of storytelling to the audience. Then that leads me to how do we even measure the effectiveness of the storytelling effort that a business is engaging on? On that, I'm going to beg Tanya if she can say something about that. Tanya, this is the last question. Please go ahead.
Thank you for that. For anybody who has questions around the psychology of storytelling into your business, feel free to reach out to me. But the effectiveness is usually around the conversations that you have. So is it leading to conversions? And this is very important. I'm a strong believer that marketing needs to actually contribute to revenue, and that it should actually create demand for services and products. So is it contributing to some form of revenue? Is it leading to conversations? If you're a small business, is it leading to conversations in your DMs? Is it leading to sales opportunities? I mean, a lot of the times we've had clients that were like, oh, we actually signed up because we really like how Tanya has been leveraging content, and we really want to do that for our business. So is that leading to that sort of conversations around your business? So for me, that's usually the biggest indicator that storytelling is working, content is working, is that leading to some form of conversion. And that depends on the form of conversion. That could be an email sign up, and that could be them buying a small product. That could be them becoming clients. So that really depends on what it is that you are going to be measuring as a form of conversion. But that's usually, for me, the biggest indicator that storytelling is working.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and I really appreciate your contribution. Thanks to Melissa, thanks to Jane, thanks to Paul, and thanks to Izu. I so much appreciate your contribution, guys. I'm so honored to have you here. Of course, we are here every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be here again to continue the conversation. And thank all of you. Because of time, this is where we are going to end it. But of course, we are coming back again. I appreciate it.